And we have Patia Neusner, who is a partner on our CRIC project on the study of reconstruction of culture after conflict. He's particularly worked for a very long time with the survivors of the Dresden bombing and finding ways of getting them to talk and finding ways which suits them in terms of what kind of memorials they participate in and which give sense. But he's also been studying the official and unofficial memorializations which happen in Dresden, and as part of the project have investigated back from what happened immediately after the bombing, kind of. So, Matthias, thank you very much.
All right, thank you, Marie-Louise. I am Matthias Neusner, a historian based in Dresden. I'm really happy to be here this afternoon and have been part of the CRIC project for 3 years almost, I think. Welcome. I would like to start with this image. I did it 3 weeks ago on the streets of our city. It's just one of these stands with picture postcards. And as you can see, as a tourist in Dresden, you can choose from which city you want to write home your picture postcard. You can start with the past in the 17th, 18th century. There's this time Madonna, which is maybe the most famous painting from the Dresden art collection. You can choose this aerial view of how Dresden looked like prior to the destruction in 1945. So there are different layers of history important for Dresden, and it's important to understand that all these connections to the history in Dresden are highly symbolic, very much charged with emotions. Dresden is a mythical, symbolic place of history, not only in Germany. So I will continue to illustrate some of these layers of history which gave the background for this landscape of memorials we will have a look on later. As I mentioned, Dresden is the capital of the kings of Saxony, and it was in the 18th and 19th century depicted and described as an idealized place of art and beauty. You can again see these famous paintings in the art collections of the city, and this is the cityscape, the silhouette along the river with all these Baroque buildings. And so these images of a Baroque city full of art and culture made a first myth connected to the city. And this myth was used by the city officials to promote tourism, especially cultural tourism. And as you can see in these old advertising, Germany's magnificent city of art and music was advertised in the early 20th century. And so we have a strong symbolism connected to Dresden with the topics of art and culture. And then came the destruction in 1945. And this gives us an illustration connected to the National Socialist propaganda campaign starting only hours after the Allied air raids against Dresden positioned Dresden as a symbol of Allied war crimes and made Dresden very famous for this special event. And this was used later on in the east of Germany for 3 or 4 decades in huge propaganda campaigns to accuse the imperialist West during the Cold War times. So this symbol of the beautiful and innocent city, which was heavily destructed in the Second World War by the Western Allies, stayed very vivid and was used and political instrumentalized during more than 4 decades in East Germany as well. Parallel to this, Dresden became a symbol for military violence against civilian population in a more general sense, and in this sense was used all over Europe and in certain aspects even worldwide. So Dresden is a warning appeal for the world, an appeal for a world without war. And in this meaning, it was used by the peace movement, not only in the east of Germany, but also in the west of Germany and in Europe. The situation changed since 1990 with the German reunification. We had the necessity in Germany to, you could say, renegotiate references to the past. And in the last 20 years, Dresden became a symbol of German suffering in World War II. This is a really problematic reference to the past, and consequently this is used by neo-Nazi movements who stage really big rallies nowadays at the anniversary day of the bombing. And of course this provokes activists from the democratic part of the society to engage against this instrumentalization by the far-right movements. And so nowadays the anniversary days are full of tension and full of conflict. They are really huge events involving several tens of thousands of people year after year. They are connected with big manifestations, with demonstrations, with dozens of difficult actions, from memorial services to art exhibitions, from discussions to public stagings, and all of this in an atmosphere which is highly charged and with emotions and with conflict, and even from time to time with violence. And a huge security force is necessary to handle these anniversary days. So we are in a really difficult remembrance situation in our city nowadays. This is the background for a symbolic memory landscape in Dresden, which consists, as everywhere, of spaces, places, and memorials. And I would like to introduce certain aspects of this memory landscape to you. Let's start with the fire line. You can see the layout of the city prior to the destruction in February 1945. These are the destructed areas, and as you can see, the whole of the city center was destructed by the firestorm. This was how it looked like in 1945. And what is left today is, in certain parts of the area, especially in the east and the south, a clear, visible and experienceable line, some borderline where the unaffected areas of the suburbs, the architectural structures older than 1945, suddenly changes into a modern city. I will show you one example, which is from the northern part of the city, and you can see here these old Baroque dwelling quarters, and right on the other side of the street we have these new modern structures. And this fire line plays an important role into within the commemoration events, as I will show you later on. Recovered buildings are important, of course. Let's have a closer look into this area right in the city center. This is the map how it looked like prior to the destruction in February 1945. And in 1952, the situation looked like this. These were the remaining buildings. Of course, all of these buildings were damaged, and these huge areas between these buildings were cleared from all ruins and rubble. And nowadays, this map is from 2009. It looks like this. You can see these modern architectural structures, modern city building. And these red-colored buildings are historical ones, where the city had been able to reconstruct, recover, or even recreate historical buildings. And of course, these buildings got a high symbolic value, which is used into or within the anniversaries of the destruction of Dresden, which is used into the remembrance landscape. Just 4 examples for buildings. One is Kreuzkirche, which is the main church of the old part of the city, which was already reconstructed in 1955. This is an image from the reconsecration service on the anniversary day, 10 years after the destruction. Another important building is the Swinger Palace, together with the art gallery building, where all these old master paintings are shown. It was inaugurated in 1956, the same year when the art collections came back from the Soviet Union. The Opera House, 40 years after the destruction, the inauguration ceremony in February 1985, and as you can see, all these events were staged and with a huge amount of propaganda. And in 1985, in one of the last years of the East German state, the whole state government came to Dresden, and they staged a really big rally with 200,000 participants. And in the last years, the Frauenkirche became very famous, which was reconsecrated in 2005. So these are just 4 examples for these highly symbolic recovered buildings. A very special feature of Dresden is the view of the city's architecture seen from the river, what we call the silhouette of the city. This became iconic in the 19th century. This painting is by a Norwegian artist called Clausendal, and he did it in the middle of the 19th century. And this is how it looks like today. And as you can see, it was really important for the Dresdeners and for city administration to get this view back. This is highly symbolic, the fight over 40 or 50 years for the reconstruction of these landmark buildings. And even the silhouette is important in the remembrance activities of the anniversary days, as I will show you later. Of course, cemeteries are important, as everywhere, also in Dresden. The special situation in Dresden is that the number of protected war graves, which are mainly civilians who died during the air raids, I depicted it here. Most of them are concentrated on 2 cemeteries, one in the north of the city, one in the south. And I will show you the example of Heidefriedhof, which is the one in the northwest of the city, where 13,000 victims of the air raids are buried. And this cemetery became a huge memorial complex. These images are from the 1960s, 1965 to be exactly. This is the structure, how it looked like in this time, and this gives you an impression how it was used for remembrance ceremonies. Of course, there are monuments outside the cemeteries. We have 3 different types of these monuments. They are monuments to National Socialist crimes in certain parts of the city. These are concentration camp groups who worked in the city. We have monuments to the victims of the air raids of February 1945 in certain parts of the city, and there's one Soviet Army monument. And of course, there are no monuments dedicated to the German Army and German warfare. This is one example for these monuments, a monument by Wieland Förster, a sculpture dedicated to the victims of February 13th. And public art is important. There are a lot of art projects in Dresden done during the last 20 years, and I will mention only 2. One is Scars of War Memorial Depots in Dresden, which started in 2001 by a group of artists called Kunstplan, which I am a member of. And we started to mark certain places important in relation to the history of Dresden in National Socialist time and Second World War. And another one is a project called Stolpersteine, Stumbling Blocks by Gunter Demnig. This is not only done in Dresden, it's done all over Germany. And he started 20 years ago to mark certain places where Jewish inhabitants of towns and villages and cities lived. People who were later deported or killed during the Holocaust. And in Dresden, these Stolpersteine started very late in 2009, but during the last years we got an increasing number of these stumbling blocks too. So this is just a brief overview over the memorial landscape of Dresden, and now some examples only, some ideas which might give you an answer to answer the question why memorials matter, why these places of memory matter. They are cues for remembering, they are reservoirs storing information about the past, they are of course places for private and collective mourning, they are stages for remembrance rituals, and as I told you, especially in Dresden, they are contested places. It means places of conflict, places even of violence, and places of confrontation between different groups and their relation to the past. And in some certain spaces, they are catalysts of discourse connected to the presence and the future of societies. Just only 6 or 7 examples. Cues for remembering. Memorials provide a connection point to personal and collective past, and this is one example from Dresden. It's a marker right in the middle of the old market square, and this inscription here, which is only 50, 60 centimeters, marks the place where, following to the air raids in 1945, more than 6,800 bodies were openly burned into the streets because the city administration had not the possibilities to bring them to the cemeteries. And as you can see, year after year, in the days around the anniversary day of the destruction of Dresden, this spot is used for personal offerings for these candles and flowers. And people who are connecting to places like this often are survivors of the bombing itself, or are family members who connect a family biography to spots like this. The fire line, year after year, is or certain points on both sides of the fire line year after year are used for candlelight ceremonies, for gatherings of survivors of the bombing. These are some pictures illustrating this. I thought that memorials or places of memory can be reservoirs, can be archives of information about the past, and this is a very special example, a school art project where in the middle of the 1990s I was involved into this project. We tried to work with school children, recovering information about the destructed parts of the city where the school is located in nowadays. And as you can see, the children are rebuild these lost streets and places, and they did research to find out what people lived there, what institutions were there, how the daily life was in the time prior to the destruction, and what happened later with this. Memorials are places for mourning. This is a photograph from Heidefriedhof. Heidefriedhof is, as you have seen in these images from the 1960s, a huge memorial installation nowadays, and all these individual graves are covered by these memorial structures. But in some families, there are traditions to lay down flowers on the spot where they think that the graves of their relatives might have been. And this is one example in the snow of the February anniversary. Memorials are stages for remembrance rituals. These are again images from Heidefriedhof. In the upper part you can see the official wreath-laying ceremony with all the state and local authorities and politicians and with the ambassadors of Great Britain, America and France taking part. That means a huge affair. But even a place like Heidefriedhof is a contested place in Dresden, and these three images in the bottom part of the picture show you activists protesting against these ceremonies. I said that even the city's silhouette is important into the remembrance events. This is a newspaper cut from 2005, and in this year far-right extremist groups for the first time had been successful in organizing a march with more than 5,000 participants. And as you can see in these newspaper image, what they try is to occupy the image of the city's silhouette for their political purpose. You can see them marching here in front of the old city view along the river. In the years following to this, the democratic public of the city tried to prevent this, and this year in 2001, for the second time, more than 15,000 or 14,000 people formed a human chain around the inner part of the city to prevent these neo-Nazis from entering these parts. And as you can see here, this is a small part of this kilometer-long chain along the city center. And one effect of this was, of course, to protect the silhouette of the city and this iconic view of Dresden from political instrumentalization by the far right. Recovered buildings are important within the remembrance, as I said. This is again a newspaper cut from 2005, and the main event staged in this year at the anniversary day was located in front of the rebuilt Opera House. We saw the image from the inauguration ceremony in 1985 earlier. And in this year, which was the 50th anniversary of the destruction of Dresden, more than 60,000 people gathered into this space and lit candles to remember, but also to protest against this neo-Nazi misuse of the remembrance in Dresden. And this is a very new picture, Memorials at the Catalyst of Discourse. 1 week ago, during the last weekend, the Museum of Military History, which is based in Dresden, reopened after a 10 years period of rethinking and rebuilding. And as you can see here, this old military architecture from the late 19th century, was broken up by the architect Daniel Libeskind to cut such a steel arrow through the building, and this arrow is pointing to the aiming point of the 1945 air raids, so indicating what the museum is dealing with, not only with all these material artifacts connected normally to military museums, like all the weapons and uniforms and all this stuff, but in the case of the Dresden Museum, is dealing with the cultural history of war and violence and what makes war to societies and to individuals. This is the main topic of the museum, and this, of course, is really important for the city as a place of memory. And yeah, we will see how it influences the remembrance situation in Dresden. So that's it. Thank you.
Thank you very much.